BeeBusinessBee Synoptic connections. Now, one of the common areas that I seem to get asked about BeeBusinessBee all the time from my students and online is all about making connections. How do I answer a question? How do I show that I'm a good candidate? And that really comes through being a synoptic candidate. So making the links, making connections, but also using evidence to support the points you're making. Now, one of the common problems that we sometimes see is that some people just try and write lots and lots of examples, but actually with no substance there. So they make a list basically of glorified examples, and they focus so much on the examples and not about getting in the content and explaining why. You've got to use examples to support your knowledge, not just fill it full of examples. So what I'm going to try and do here in this little short video now is take you through some of the concepts and then try and throw some examples in, use some data to support the points I'm going to make, and show you how some areas of the course link together, focusing on the economic factors at the moment, so looking how we can link those all together. So in this presentation we're going to look at some of the connections. We're typically going to use examples that you could use in your BeeBusinessBee content, and we're going to start with the topic of interest rates. Interest rates. Interest rates are currently at a record low. The Bank of England has set the base rate at 0.5%. However, it is predicted that in the next 3 years this could increase to 3%. That increase in interest rates will have an impact on the level of spending in the economy, so the amount of disposable income, and also the levels of borrowing, for example, an investment that takes place. Because at the moment, with a low base rate at 0.5%, we are encouraging consumer spending and we are discouraging people from actually saving. Think logically about this, that at the moment, if you put your money in the bank and save it, you're going to get a very poor return on it, so you've probably got a much more incentive to go out there and spend and purchase items. So how does this impact on the economy? So let's make some links. So because it encourages spending, it's going to create business growth. That's been demonstrated by the recent figures suggesting the economy is growing at 2.9%. So it's growing much stronger and much quicker than it actually was forecast initially. And because of this, we're having to see rapid investment by organisations in growing their organisations. So they're increasing in size and they're increasing in capacity. And because they're doing that, they then start to take on more jobs and create more wealth. You're starting to see more confidence because people are starting to feel they can go out there and get a job, and because they can spend money and they can see that other people out there are spending money, they're feeling more confident about the whole economy and the whole way they feel, and that obviously creates more spending. Of course, this then starts to create inflation. But how does this impact on exchange rates? Well, because at the moment we've got a weaker currency, because we've got reduced currency demand. So think about the supply and demand. At the moment, the investors that buy currency are not wanting to buy our currency because our interest rate is so low. So there's no incentive to save in the UK markets. So there's less demand for the currency. Because we've got less demand for our currency, what we're tending to see here is that imports are apparently appearing to be more expensive to importers. However, exports are appearing to be cheaper. So as a result of that, it has a massive effect on different organisations. And that comes back to our stronger pound, imports cheaper, exports dearer, our SPICE model. And of course at the moment we have a weak currency, which doesn't favour our importers but does favour our exporters. So let's look, how does that impact on some organisations? Well, exporters at the moment are benefiting. People like Portmeirion, the pottery company, actually reported £58 million worth of sales in 2013. Many of those from export to America, so the weaker currency helps them. So this tends to benefit primary sector, secondary sector manufacturers who actually manage to export. However, imports on the other hand suffer. So the typical tertiary sector examples like Poundland, they are starting to see their profit margins being reduced even further, making it harder to compete and tighter margins. And this is all because your profit margins are starting to be shrunk by the fact that you're an importer and you're getting less in a pound for your currency every time you exchange it. So you become more dependent on trying to find other ways to save money, such as trying to increase your economies of scale. So the growth strategy, so Poundland, for example, been rapidly expanding. You may look to float on the stock market. That's another option that Poundland are doing to try and bring in more capital to fund this growth. They may look to make more efficiencies or invest in a technological just-in-time system to make your savings. So what you tend to find now is that importers start to look for other options to try and lower their costs. Some, for example, may start to try and shop in the domestic market and purchase in the domestic market so they don't have to consider exchange rates. So how does all this affect inflation? Well, inflation is tending to start to increase slowly, and this is typically because of the increase in disposable income and the increase in investment, so more spending. Because you've got more spending, you've got more demand, so demand is starting to increase. That is creating inflation. At the moment, we're close to our target of 2% on the CPI figure. So things are looking good. However, there are some suggestions that inflation will start to grow much quicker, and the Bank of England will have to start taking some measures by adjusting the interest rate to try and slow that spending down. And obviously, we just talked about that's where the 3% figure came in right at the beginning, about increasing the level to 3%. Now, it creates inflation. We tend to see cost push inflation because wages start to increase. So that's one of your costs. Resources start to increase, the cost of those. And then you've got the other side of it, you've got demand pull. Because you've got more demand, then you tend to find the prices start to increase as well. This has got to be managed carefully, hence where the interest rate comes in and adjusting that from the Bank of England. But of course, this has another effect. How does this impact on unemployment? Well, unemployment typically starts to fall. We're now at record lows, 6.6% unemployment in the UK. We're starting to see it come down. Now remember, this is all to do with the technical definition of unemployment, so you have to be actively seeking work. Now, you tend to find unemployment starts to fall because you've got an increase in demand. So this demand from both sides, consumers demand more, so that means that the organisations are starting to recruit more staff. They're starting to expand and they need more employees and they need more skilled employees. And then you start to get potentially shortages in the labour market. And when you get shortages in there, you get a reduction in the supply. As you know, the price is going to start to increase. So people are going to start to ask for increased wages. And that's going to push up costs and push up your inflation. So how does that impact on your business investment? Well, typically businesses start to increase their level of investment. They start to look to grow. They typically go about this because they're going to be taking advantage of cheap borrowing costs. Because the interest rate is low, they can borrow money fairly cheaply. This means they can expand, for example, into capital-intensive production, so machinery, which then, of course, becomes more efficient for the organisation and they're not so dependent on the supply of labour, which, of course, as we just said a minute ago, can fluctuate and become expensive. And then you've got increased levels of consumer demand, which means that by growing your organisation, you're taking advantage of the growth in the market. So let's now throw in another link. How can this impact on acquisitions and mergers? Well, typically you're going to see more acquisitions and mergers at this time. Because of the cheap capital that you can tap into, this means that you can get the funds to actually acquire and merge with organisations. Because you've got increasing levels of consumer demand, you can tap into this and you can try and grow your organisation, increase your economies of scale, and you do this through normally acquiring or merging with new organisations. And this is where the benefit comes in. So you're typically going to see lots more acquisition and mergers suggested. Look at the Pfizer AstraZeneca acquisition and merger that was talked about recently. It's not going to happen now, but there's been quite a few talked about recently in the media that there are organisations considering the acquisition and mergers approach because the economic conditions are perfect for it. Okay, that is a very short and prompt idea of showing you how you can link together some of the content with some examples to try and show that you are a strong business candidate, using the technical terms and explaining your answer. Notice that what I did there was not actually that complex. However, if you watch it back again, you'll realise it sounds technical. It sounds like it came from a business student. And that is one of the key skills. You don't want to have your exam paper reading like anybody off the street has done it. You need to make sure it sounds like a business candidate, somebody who studied the course for 2 years or 1 year, actually knows what they're on about. And that's the most important thing. Don't forget to follow me on my Twitter account, that's at BeeBusinessBee, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And remember, you can tweet me any areas of business you want me to cover in the future. Don't forget to check out my website, beebusinessbee.co.uk. And hopefully I will catch you all soon.